Welcome to Lunsford's Daily Sunday School. The reading of Genesis chapter 18. King James and easy to understand versions. With side notes. God visits Abraham. Verse 1. The Lord appeared to Abraham. Abraham was near the big trees at Mamre. He sat at the door of his tent. It was in the hot part of the day. Verse 2. When Abraham looked, he saw 3 men. They were standing in front of him. And when he saw them, he ran from the door of the tent. He went to meet them. He bent his head down very low. Verse 3. He said, "Sir, if you are pleased with me, do not pass by me. I am your servant." Verse 4. I will bring some water so that you may wash your feet. After that, please rest yourselves under the tree. Verse 5. I will fetch a piece of bread so that you may eat. Since your journey brought you here to me, please eat here. After that, you may continue your journey. So the men said, "Do as you have said." Verse 6. And Abraham ran into the tent to Sarah. He said to her, "Prepare quickly a quantity of flour. Mix it, and make cakes." Verse 7. And Abraham ran to the animals. He chose a young cow that was good for meat. He gave it to his servant and the servant prepared it quickly. Verse 8. Then Abraham took cheese and milk. He took the young cow, which was ready to eat. He put these things in front of the men. He stood by them under the tree while they ate. Verse 9. The men said to Abraham, "Where is Sarah your wife?" And he said, "She is in the tent." Verse 10. The Lord said, "I will certainly return to you in the spring. When I return, Sarah your wife shall have a son." And Sarah was behind him. She listened at the door of the tent. Verse 11. Now Abraham and Sarah were both very old. Women produce children until a certain age. But Sarah had passed that age. Verse 12. So Sarah laughed to herself. She said to herself, "I have grown old and my husband is old. I cannot have a child. I cannot have that pleasure." Verse 13. The Lord said to Abraham, Sarah should not have laughed. She should not have said, "I cannot have a child, since I am old." Verse 14. Nothing is too difficult for the Lord. At the time that I have mentioned, I will return. In the spring, I will return to you. When I return, Sarah shall have a son. Verse 15. And Sarah was afraid. Therefore she said, "I did not laugh." But the Lord said, "No, you did laugh." Abraham's prayer. Verse 16. Then the men set out from there and they looked toward Sodom. And Abraham went with them as they began their journey. Verse 17. The Lord said, "I will not hide from Abraham the thing that I intend to do." Verse 18. I remember that Abraham's family shall become a great and powerful nation. And all the families that are on the earth shall receive good things because of him. Verse 19. I have chosen him so that he may command his children. He shall also command his family who shall live after him. He will command them to live in the Lord's way. He will command them to do the right things and good things. So the Lord will bring to Abraham the things that he has promised to him. Verse 20. Then the Lord said, I have heard very bad things about Sodom and Gomorrah. Their deeds are very evil. Verse 21. Therefore I will go there. Perhaps they have actually done all the things that I have heard about them. I will know the truth. Verse 22. So the men went further and they traveled toward Sodom. But Abraham stayed and he stood in front of the Lord. Verse 23. Then Abraham came near to the Lord. He said, Will you really kill the good people with the bad people? Verse 24. If there are 50 good people in the city, will you destroy the place? Please let it remain because of the 50 good people. Verse 25. Do not do a thing like that. Do not kill the good people with the wicked people. If you do that, the good people will suffer with the wicked people. Do not do that. You are the judge of the whole earth. So you will certainly do the thing that is right. Verse 26. And the Lord said, Perhaps I will find 50 good people in Sodom city. If I find them, I will let the whole place remain because of them. Verse 27. Abraham answered, I am only dust and ashes. But I have boldly decided to speak to the Lord. Verse 28. What will you do if 5 out of the 50 good people are missing? Will you destroy the whole city because 5 good people are missing? And the Lord said, I will not destroy it if I find 45 good people there. Verse 29. Again Abraham spoke to him. He said, If you find 40 good people there, will you let it remain? The Lord answered, If there are 40, I will not destroy it. Verse 30. Then Abraham said, Please do let not the Lord be angry. So I will speak. Perhaps there will be 30 good people there. The Lord answered, I will not destroy it if I find 30 there. Verse 31. Abraham said, I have boldly decided to speak to the Lord. Perhaps you will find 20 good people there. The Lord answered, If there are 20, I will not destroy the city. Verse 32. Then Abraham said, I pray that the Lord will not be angry. I will speak again only once. Perhaps you will find 10 good people there. The Lord answered, For 10 good people I will not destroy the city. Verse 33. And the Lord finished his talk with Abraham. The Lord went away and Abraham returned to his tent. Side notes. Verses 2 through 5. Abraham gave a friendly welcome to the 3 men. He would do the same for any visitors. That was the custom. Abraham thought that the 3 men were ordinary travelers. He did not know that 2 were angels. And he did not realize that 1 was God. Verses 6 through 8. The quantity that Abraham said was 3 seahs. That was a large quantity. And Abraham chose a young cow. He did not choose a young goat, which would be smaller. So this meal was a large one. Abraham was very generous to his guests. And he served his guests, but he did not eat with them. Verse 9. The men already knew that Abraham was married. And they knew his wife's name. Ordinary travelers would not know these things. Verse 10. The door of the tent was a curtain on the front of the tent. Verse 12. Sarah still did not know who the men were, and she thought that they joked. Verse 13. God knew what Sarah said. He knew that, although she only spoke to herself. Verse 15. Sarah was afraid. But the reason for her fear was not that she might have a son. She was afraid of God. And she realized that the men came from God. Verse 16. Abraham went with the men for a short distance. That was the custom. Abraham would do the same for any travelers who had visited him. But he knew that one traveler was God. Therefore, Abraham had another reason to go with them. He loved to be with God. Verse 17. God wants us to know what He is doing. Jesus said the same thing to His followers. See John chapter 15 verse 15. He said, I do not call you my servants. A servant does not know what his master will do. But I have called you friends. And Jesus told His followers what He was doing. Verse 22. So the men set out. There were 2 men that went further. And they were angels. See Genesis chapter 19 verse 1. The other man was God. He stayed and he talked with Abraham. Until Jesus was born. God seldom appeared as a man. But He appeared to Abraham. Abraham was called God's friend. See James chapter 2 verse 23. Verse 23. Through this prayer, Abraham changed what God intended to do. Before Abraham's prayer, God intended to destroy Sodom if some inhabitants were wicked. After Abraham's prayer, He intended to save Sodom if there were 10 good inhabitants. So our prayers can change what happens. But Abraham could not have prayed like this if God had not told him his plan. So God and Abraham were working together. Verse 25. Abraham said, You are the judge of the whole earth. You will certainly do the thing that is right. That was a statement and a request. It was a statement. Abraham said it because he trusted God to do the right thing. It was a request. Abraham asked God not to destroy good people. He meant that to destroy good people would be a wrong thing. 3 different things were possible. God might destroy the whole city because it was evil. Abraham asked God not to do that. God might save the city because some people were good. Abraham asked God to do that. God might save the good people and destroy the other people. Abraham did not think of that. But that is what God actually did. God does not usually give judgment on whole cities or on whole nations. And He does not usually save whole cities or whole nations. He does save single people. And He will give judgment on each person. Verse 27. Abraham said, I am only dust and ashes. He meant that he was worth nothing. And God was very much greater than he was. And Abraham meant that he was only a man. God had made man from dust. See Genesis chapter 2 verse 7. The promise of Isaac confirmed * explained a. Abraham welcomes important visitors. 1. Abraham invites the Lord and 2 others to a meal. Then the Lord appeared to him by the terebinth trees of Mamre, as he was sitting in the tent door in the heat of the day. So he lifted his eyes and looked, And behold, 3 men were standing by him. And when he saw them, he ran from the tent door to meet them, bowed himself to the ground, and said, My Lord, if I have now found favor in your sight, do not pass on by your servant. Please let a little water be brought. Wash your feet, and rest yourselves under the tree. And I will bring a morsel of bread, that you may refresh your hearts. After that, you may pass by. Inasmuch as you have come to your servant. They said, Do as you have said. 2. Then the Lord appeared. Apparently, this happened a short time after the events of Genesis chapter 17. In Genesis chapter 17 verse 21, God said Sarah would give birth 1 year later. And at this time she was not yet pregnant. So this couldn't be more than 3 months after the events in Genesis chapter 17. 3. Then the Lord appeared to him by the terebinth trees. Here again, the Lord came to Abraham in human appearance. This is another presentation of Jesus in human form before his incarnation. Here among the 3 men visiting Abraham. 4. We can assume that this was God, in the person of Jesus Christ, appearing to Abraham before his incarnation and birth at Bethlehem. We assume this because God the Father, it says, No one has seen God at any time. The only begotten Son, who is in the bosom of the Father, He has declared him. See John chapter 1 verse 18. And no man has ever seen God in the person of the Father. See 1 Timothy chapter 6 verse 16. Therefore, if God appeared to someone in human appearance in the Old Testament and no one has seen God the Father, it makes sense the appearance is of the eternal Son, the second person of the Trinity, before his incarnation in Bethlehem. 5. The terebinth trees of Mamre. This was a significant place in Abraham's life. Abraham moved to Mamre when he came back into the promised land from Egypt and built an altar there. See Genesis chapter 13 verse 18. And apparently stayed there for some time. See Genesis chapter 14 verse 13. Abraham purchased a field and cave at Mamre, using it for Sarah's burial. See Genesis chapter 23 verses 17 through 19. Abraham himself was buried there in Genesis chapter 25 verse 9. And his son Isaac was also buried there. See Genesis chapter 49 verse 30. And chapter 50 verse 13. 6. Behold, 3 men were standing by him. Though we don't know if Abraham immediately understood the identity of his visitors, he did honor the leader of these 3 as his superior bowed himself to the ground. 7. Though the Lord in the person of Jesus Christ appeared to Abraham twice before Genesis chapter 12 verse 7 and chapter 17 verse 1, we don't know if Jesus looked the same each time, or if Abraham simply knew who it was by some sort of intuition or spiritual knowledge. 8. He ran from the tent door to meet them. According to his godliness and the customs of that culture, Abraham enthusiastically offered the hospitality of his house to these travelers. 9. Sarah and Abraham prepare a meal for their visitors. So Abraham hurried into the tent to Sarah and said, "Quickly, make ready 3 measures of fine meal. Knead it and make cakes." And Abraham ran to the herd, took a tender and good calf, gave it to a young man, and he hastened to prepare it. So he took butter and milk and the calf which he had prepared and set it before them. And he stood by them under the tree as they ate. 9. Abraham hurried into the tent. Abraham's urgency seems to go beyond the great sense of hospitality that was common in his time. Abraham understood there was something special about these 3 visitors. 10. Abraham ran to the herd. Though Abraham and Sarah hurried to prepare this meal for their visitors, it still took considerable time to make and serve the food. The sense is that Abraham and Sarah themselves did this work, instead of commanding servants to do it for them. 11. God reconfirms his promise of a son. Then they said to him, "Where is Sarah your wife?" So he said, "Here, in the tent." And he said, "I will certainly return to you according to the time of life, and behold, Sarah your wife shall have a son." Sarah was listening in the tent door which was behind him. 12. Where is Sarah your wife? They called her according to her new name, given just a few weeks before Genesis chapter 17 verses 15 through 16. 13. I will certainly return to you according to the time of life, and behold, Sarah your wife shall have a son. This promise of regeneration, return to you according to the time of life, was specifically made to Abraham. Sarah also was miraculously regenerated, but this promise was to Abraham. 14. Sarah your wife shall have a son. It seems that God dramatically repeated this promise to Abraham in a relatively short time. Previously in Genesis chapter 17 verses 17 through 22. Like Abraham, we need to hear God's promises over and over again. It is a way God uses to encourage and develop our faith. So then faith comes by hearing, and hearing the Word of God. Romans chapter 10 verse 17. 15. Sarah's reaction to God's promise. Now Abraham and Sarah were old, well advanced in age, and Sarah had passed the age of childbearing. Therefore Sarah laughed within herself, saying, "After I have grown old, shall I have pleasure, my Lord being old also?" 16. Sarah had passed the age of childbearing. By all outward circumstances, there was good reason for Sarah to laugh at the literal fulfillment of this promise. She had passed the age of childbearing, which literally seems to mean the manner of women had ceased to be with Sarah. She had stopped menstruating and had gone through menopause. 17. Even accounting for their long lives, Abraham lived to be 175 and Sarah 127. They were both well past middle age. It would take a miracle of God for them to have literal children through normal means. 18. Therefore Sarah laughed within herself. Significantly, this is what Sarah and Abraham most wanted all their lives, to have a child of their own. Yet they found it hard to believe God's promise when He said He would grant it to them. 19. It is strangely characteristic of us to believe God's promise for a long time, enduring much discouragement along the way, until the promise is almost there. And then we find doubt. We are grateful that He is greater than our doubts. 20. After I have grown old, shall I have pleasure? Sarah laughed within herself at this promise. She could not believe God would literally grant this child as the result of normal sexual relations. 21. Leupold translates Genesis chapter 18 verse 12. After I have become worn out, have I enjoyed sexual delight and my Lord too as an old man? Leupold then observed, the matter is not put very delicately by Sarah. 22. It may be, even after the dramatic promises of Genesis chapter 17, Abraham and Sarah found some way to spiritualize God's promise, making it mean something other than what God intended. Here, God made it plain. Abraham and Sarah would have normal sexual relations and produce a baby. 23. God answers Sarah's laugh. And the Lord said to Abraham, why did Sarah laugh, saying, shall I surely bear a child, since I am old? Is anything too hard for the Lord? At the appointed time I will return to you, according to the time of life. And Sarah shall have a son. But Sarah denied it, saying, I did not laugh, for she was afraid. And he said, no, but you did laugh. 24. Why did Sarah laugh? God heard Sarah's laugh even though she laughed within herself. The sense was, her laugh could not be heard normally. But God heard it nevertheless. There was nothing hidden before the Lord. 25. We might live very differently if we remembered that God hears and knows everything we think and say. 26. At the appointed time I will return to you. When Sarah laughed at God's twice given promise, we might think God would take the promise away. Instead, God responded by dealing with her sin of unbelief, not by taking away the promise. 27. If we are faithless, He remains faithful. He cannot deny Himself. 2 Timothy chapter 2 verse 13. 28. Is there anything too hard for the Lord? God would demonstrate through Abraham and Sarah that there is nothing too hard for the Lord and that God can even triumph over the weak faith of His people. 29. Hard is the same Hebrew word for wonderful in Isaiah chapter 9. 6. For unto us a child is born. Unto us a son is given, and His name will be called Wonderful. Jesus is our Wonderful One. And He isn't too hard or wonderful for God to give unto us. 30. The Lord said to Abraham. Significantly, God dealt with Abraham about this, not Sarah herself. Because Abraham was the head of his home, God promised that it would happen. And at the appointed time, Abraham intercedes for the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah. God decides to reveal to Abraham the fate of Sodom and Gomorrah. Then the men rose from there and looked toward Sodom. And Abraham went with them to send them on the way. And the Lord said, "Shall I hide from Abraham what I am doing? Since Abraham shall surely become a great and mighty nation, and all the nations of the earth shall be blessed in him? For I have known him, in order that he may command his children and his household after him, that they keep the way of the Lord, to do righteousness and justice, that the Lord may bring to Abraham what he has spoken to him." Abraham went with them to send them on the way. On that day, it was customary for a hospitable host to accompany his guests on their journey for a while as they departed. And the Lord said, God asked himself a question. He didn't do this because he didn't know what to do or needed to process his thinking. God asked himself this question to reveal his thinking to us, the readers of Genesis. Shall I hide from Abraham what I am doing? Because of what God would bring from Abraham, a great and mighty nation. And because Abraham had to be a great leader, that he may command his children and his household after him, God determined to reveal to Abraham what he would soon do with Sodom and Gomorrah. The reasons stated in this passage are important. God's purpose in revealing this to Abraham was not just to share interesting or shocking information. And it wasn't to simply satisfy Abraham's curiosity. God wanted to do something in Abraham's life through what he would reveal to him. God tells Abraham he will see if Sodom and Gomorrah are worthy of judgment. And the Lord said, because the outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah is great, and because their sin is very grave, I will go down now and see whether they have done altogether according to the outcry against it that has come to me. And if not, I will know. Because the outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah is great. The offense of these cities was great. Their sin was very grave. And we may suppose that this outcry came from many sources. God in his holy justice cried out against Sodom and Gomorrah. Onlooking angelic beings cried out against Sodom and Gomorrah. The multitude of victims of Sodom and Gomorrah's depravity cried out against those cities. Creation itself was affected by their unnatural transgression and cried out against them. I will go down now and see. Because the judgments of the Lord are true and righteous, see Psalm chapter 19 verse 9 and Revelation chapter 16 verse 7. God would only judge Sodom and Gomorrah on direct, accurate knowledge. We are not told this because God did not know, but to demonstrate to us the thorough character of God's knowledge and integrity. 3. Abraham asks an important question. Will God destroy the righteous with the wicked? Then the men turned away from there and went toward Sodom. But Abraham still stood before the Lord. And Abraham came near and said, would you also destroy the righteous with the wicked? Suppose there were 50 righteous within the city. Would you also destroy the place and not spare it for the 50 righteous that were in it? Far be it from you to do such a thing as this, to slay the righteous with the wicked, so that the righteous should be as the wicked. Far be it from you. Shall not the judge of all the earth do right? So the Lord said, if I find in Sodom 50 righteous within the city, then I will spare all the place for their sakes. The men turned away from there and went toward Sodom. But Abraham still stood before the Lord. We see the two men were actually the angels who visited Sodom in Genesis chapter 19. The third person in the party was actually the Lord himself. And Abraham came near. Abraham came near to the Lord. Effective intercession is a matter of drawing near to God so we can pray with His heart. Would you also destroy the righteous with the wicked? In discussing this question, in a sense, Abraham reminded the Lord of his own nature and principles. Shall not the judge of all the earth do right? Abraham thought that God, as a righteous judge, could not and would not punish the innocent in the same way as the guilty. Effective prayer speaks of knowing who God is and how God works in a particular situation. Effective prayer doesn't see itself as a passive spectator in what God does. But effective prayer acts as if it must actually remind God in prayer. We might find it remarkable Abraham even cared about the people of Sodom and Gomorrah. He might have just prayed, "Lord, get my nephew Lot out of there first." But he didn't. Abraham's heart was full of sorrow and compassion, even for the wicked of Sodom and Gomorrah. If I find in Sodom 50 righteous within the city, then I will spare all the place for their sakes. God said this because Abraham asked. When Abraham drew near to the Lord and prayed according to God's revealed nature and will, God agreed. The Lord said that He would spare the city if there were 50 righteous there. Abraham bargains with God for Sodom and Gomorrah. Then Abraham answered and said, "Indeed now, I who am but dust and ashes have taken it upon myself to speak to the Lord. Suppose there were 5 less than the 50 righteous. Would you destroy all of the city for lack of 5? So he said, If I find there 45, I will not destroy it. And he spoke to him yet again and said, Suppose there should be 40 found there? So he said, I will not do it for the sake of 40. Then he said, Let not the Lord be angry. And I will speak. Suppose 30 should be found there? So he said, I will not do it if I find 30 there. And he said, Indeed now, I have taken it upon myself to speak to the Lord. Suppose 20 should be found there? So he said, I will not destroy it for the sake of 20. Then he said, Let not the Lord be angry. And I will speak but once more. Suppose 10 should be found there? And he said, I will not destroy it for the sake of 10. So the Lord went his way as soon as he had finished speaking with Abraham. And Abraham returned to his place. Suppose there were 5 less than the 50 righteous. In his first exchange with God, Abraham established a principle, that God would not destroy the righteous with the wicked. With that principle established, it was then just a matter of numbers. How many righteous people would God spare the city for? Abraham's intercession was effective because it was specific. He talked about specific numbers with God, and not only in broad, general terms. Often our prayers are ineffective because we really don't ask the Lord to do anything. Instead, we often just toss wishes up to heaven. Let not the Lord be angry. And I will speak. Abraham continued his intercession with bold humility. He was not proud or arrogant before the Lord. Yet he still continued to ask. Abraham's humility was demonstrated in that nowhere in his prayer did he ask why or did he demand that God explain himself and his actions. Suppose 10 should be found there. Abraham was a skilled negotiator and he prevailed upon God to lower the number of righteous required to spare the city. First by units of 5. Then by units of 10. Until the number settled at 10. It is impossible to miss the persistence of Abraham in intercession. Abraham did not stop asking at 40 or 50 and say simply, "Now it's in the Lord's hands," or, "The Lord will do what the Lord will do." Abraham shows us that there are times when an intercessor must feel that the eternal destiny of men and women depends on the intercessor's prayer. This is the kind of heart God wanted to draw out of Abraham. A heart that cared so much for people made in the image of God that he worked hard to intercede on behalf of a city that deserved judgment. This was the heart a great leader of a large and mighty nation needed to have. Remember, there is a sense in which all this negotiation was in vain because Sodom and Gomorrah were destroyed. There were not 10 righteous people in the city. Only 4. And surely God knew how many righteous people there actually were in the cities. Yet God specifically revealed the fate of these cities to Abraham to draw out of him an intercessor's heart of love. So even before the time of Jesus, Abraham could be conformed to the image of his Son. See Romans chapter 8 verse 29. Who is himself an intercessor? Abraham returned to his place. We wonder if Abraham should not have continued the negotiations because there were only 4 righteous in the city. Would God have spared the city for 4 if Abraham had asked? Perhaps Abraham felt Lot would surely have brought 6 people beyond his own family to God in his time in Sodom.